Alrighty, guys. So welcome everybody to this latest DevSkiller webinar entitled Eliminating Unconscious Bias in Tech Recruitment. Now, we've got a very exciting discussion planned for you guys today. But before we jump into that, I've got a couple of very quick housekeeping things to get through. So first of all, please send in your questions. We will be having time for an open Q&A session at the end of today's discussion. Or if you like, you can fire them in the chat box throughout the talk and our panelists can answer them throughout the discussion. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so we'll be sending you a link to that recording tomorrow morning. So if you can't make it to the end, or if you'd like to share it with one of your colleagues, keep an eye out on your inbox tomorrow morning for that recording. And last but not least, we will be also sending you a post-webinar survey. You're going to get that straight after the webinar concludes. So if you take the time out of your day, about 2 minutes to fill that in, we'd really appreciate it. You can let us know how we went today. You can also suggest some topics you'd like to see us cover in the future. All right, so now that we've got everybody here, I think we might introduce our panelists for today. I'll go from left to right. So I might start with you, Amy. So thanks very much for joining us. Can you give us a bit of background about yourself?
Sure. My name is Amy Sperling. I'm the CEO and founder at Compt. Compt is a platform that really empowers companies to offer unlimited employee perks, but on a budget, tax compliant, all that good stuff, but in a way that is really inclusive so that every single person can do something that is meaningful to themselves individually, regardless of where they're located in the world. And so excited to be joining you folks here today. Really appreciate it.
Barry, can you give us a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, thanks, Justin. So Barry Matthews, I'm CEO at Open Assembly. We at Open Assembly are a research and advisory firm. We were established in 2018 in collaboration with Harvard University. We research and design new ways for businesses to engage remote, digital, external talent. So we help them to achieve a blended workforce with employees alongside agencies and alongside resources, skills, brilliant people that they get from the human cloud. We enable them to do that safely and securely in an equality way. So delighted to be here.
Awesome. Thanks very much for taking the time. Okay, Michael, can you give us a bit of background about yourself?
Yes, I can. Thank you. So Michael Morris, I'm a co-founder and CEO of Torque. And Torque we're a talent marketplace. We're a talent ecosystem, actually, of software developers. And in this ecosystem, there are three primary things that we do. We give our technology talent an opportunity to learn new skills and prove the skills that they do have. We also allow them to earn, so they can earn money as freelancers on our platform. That's a primary way that we make money as an organization. And then we also provide opportunities for our talent and our community to return their skills, return their knowledge in the form of mentoring to newer members or people that are coming on board with the platform for the first time. So in a nutshell, we provide an ecosystem for developers to learn, earn, and return over their technology careers.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that introduction. And last but not least, Sonia, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day. Can you give us a few words about yourself?
Absolutely, my pleasure. This is Sanya. I am leading the human resource function at Lena AI. And a little bit about what do we do at Lena AI. Lena is an autonomous conversational AI platform that helps enterprises facilitate better employee experience. Right? Like Forbes position us as series for employees. Lena technology helps employee-facing teams, especially like HR teams, to deal with the repetitive yet important tasks like answering employee questions, knowledge management, generating employee documents on demand, managing employee tickets in a very effective manner so that they can focus on much more high-value projects, right? So Lena is very well adverse and working with 100 plus platforms today, like including SAP SuccessFactors, ADP's, Oracle, Workday, and likewise, and helping more than 250 customers today of the nature like Nestle, Puma, AirAsia, Lafarge, Boyd, with millions of employees across the globe to deal with their employee experience. That's what about Lena AI.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for those introduction, guys. I will just take us through quickly our agenda for today before we do jump into the discussion. So what are we going to cover today? So obviously this webinar is focusing on unconscious bias. We're going to dig deeper into the topic of unconscious bias. We're going to do that by looking at some of the different kinds of unconscious bias that exist and how to sort of recognize them and spot them. We're also going to discuss some strategies to mitigate your own biases. So this is something that I think is inherent with unconscious bias, because unconscious bias is something that you aren't aware of, but something that to discuss some strategies on how to become a little bit more self-aware in order to sort of, free this from the hiring process. And last but not least, we'll be discussing tips on how to build a process that is free from unconscious bias. So we do have a lot to unpack today. I'm going to stop sharing and jump into our first question. But before I do that, I will launch a poll. And we've got a few polls for today. Some of them are designed just to have a better idea of who we're talking to, but also sort of to build our discussion as well. So this one's very straightforward. And it should appear on your screen now. And basically it is, which industry do you work for? We've got HR, IT, or other. DevSkill is obviously a technical screening solution. So most of the time we're speaking to people from either the HR or IT side of things. But it'll be interesting for us to know so that we know who we're talking to, so we can sort of structure our answers accordingly. There's a few more answers I can see that need to come in. But I think I will end the poll and share those results. So they should pop up on your screen now. So it's a pretty even mix, but we do have obviously 63% HR, 31% IT, and there were some people that also voted for others. So that's very interesting for us to know, and appreciate you guys taking the time to answer that poll. Okay, so why don't I jump into our first question? I might start with you, Amy. Obviously, unconscious bias is, I guess, somewhat of a topic that's been around for a little while now, but I wondered if you could sort of elaborate in your experience what unconscious bias is and how it influences technical hiring decisions.
Well, I mean, I think it definitely influences technical hiring decisions. All you need to do is look at most technical teams and see how homogenous they are to see that there is clearly, some unconscious bias happening there. Most of my prior companies, I was a CFO, COO a bunch of times. A lot of those teams were really, really homogenous. And so if you want to actually build out, people were not deliberately trying to hire people that were the same person over and over again. But there can be things that are biases that are baked into your recruiting process, your hiring process, your interviewing process, that can kind of narrow the scope of who is even in the pool that you're looking at. So you may think that you've got a representative talent pool, but for instance, in Boston, a lot of tech companies say we want somebody with an MIT engineering background. Then you're only pooling from folks that went to MIT, which is not a very diverse group, quite frankly. So if you start pulling in, whether you intend to or not, if you start ruling, groups out that way, you automatically narrow your hiring pool to a pretty tight-knit group.
Yeah, for sure. Because you can't really do much to sort of become diverse if you're, like you said, starting from this very, very narrow pool to start with. Barry, I wonder if you can comment on that in your experience throughout your career. How has it been with dealing with sort of unconscious bias?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think unconscious bias plays an important role whether we like it or not as humans. We try to remove conscious bias, of course, but unconscious bias we're not even aware of, and it comes in so many forms. I've seen it lots of times, and whether it's the way code is written, even if it's not somebody's image or their fashion sense or their color or religion or the place they live in or their name, it can be anything. But it can be, as you can look at software code and see how it's annotated, and you can be biased against it. It's almost, maybe it's not impossible, but it's incredibly difficult to remove unconscious bias because we don't know that we're doing it. We can try and educate ourselves, but we will still be biased because we're humans. I think it's incredibly difficult challenge for us to get over. And maybe we don't need to get over it. Maybe if we just relied on a machine and nothing else to influence our hiring decisions, we might end up with the same type of person again and again and again, which of course it doesn't encourage a diverse workforce and won't lead to better, more productive results. So I think we need to careful we don't try to cut it out completely, but we need to manage it. So I mean, I think it's a really, really interesting area of recruitment and talent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you talked about machines in that point as well. Like machines are the same as us in a sense. If we're making the same decisions over and over again, we're not really going to do anything about sort of diversifying recruitment. But we do hope to unpack this idea of whether, obviously, unconscious bias cannot be eliminated. But I guess that's the point of what we're discussing here is can we become aware of it, educate ourselves to sort of at least minimize or mitigate bias essentially from the hiring process.
Exactly.
Well, thanks very much for those answers, guys. I'll move along, and as we said in the introduction, we're not just talking about what is unconscious bias and how it influences hiring decisions, but also like the different kinds. Barry, you touched on it slightly, but Michael, I wonder if you could elaborate on the different kinds of unconscious bias that you've seen or experienced, and maybe how to spot them.
Yeah, for sure. So primarily my background has been in the technology industry. So as Amy alluded to, like there has been significant cases of unconscious bias that's been in the technology field. I mean, I see it on, I've seen it. I've always seen it and I continue to see it, which is disappointing, but I see it certainly in gender. I see it in geography. And I think, it's like as you start to think about, I'd open this up for opening people's minds to how to solve this problem. A lot of data or a lot of analysis could point you in the direction of saying that, hey, and this is, I've seen a lot of this in a recruiting process where it starts right with the resume. Right. And at an immediate point where that unconscious bias comes into play. And it's either the geographic, origin or current place. In technology, I don't think you really need to be anywhere to be able to perform your job specifically. But I think there's a lot of geographic bias that comes into place, and certainly gender. And I'd say the last one that I see continuously is pedigree, where, maybe it's not. I think a lot of times you're not getting looked at because somebody with a different pedigree is getting looked at more often first, getting more of a priority. And that could be, your previous jobs, who you've worked with, or often what I see is like where you went to school. Now, here's the thing that I just throw out there is like, I think this is a problem that starts in grade school. Like, I think there's a systemic issue that we have where I have 4 kids, 3 of them are girls. And as any, I'm a computer science dad, I put my girls into Lego camp. And, they were the only girls that went to Lego camp, predominantly. It was 90% males. Like, it starts really early on. I do a lot of volunteering for STEM organizations, and I'm constantly trying to solve the problem of making it more, I don't know what the right word is, acceptable or, to take out bias, gender bias in particular, in STEM and engineering fields really early on, because it starts then. It starts to preclude people, or it starts to put people in a mindset of, hey, maybe this isn't the area for me or the direction for me. And if we can start thinking about that systemic issue really early on, I think that's where we have to start uncovering some of these solutions. It's not an easy problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Sanya, maybe from your perspective in a different part of the world as well, like how have you experienced or seen unconscious bias throughout your career?
Oh, absolutely. I think addition to what Michael said here, first of all, I feel unconscious bias plays, like Barry also added, right, plays a very inevitable role in hiring. Like, every human on the planet is prone to be biased in decision making because this is how it's built in our brains, right? Throughout human history, these biases are incredibly helpful because they serve as mental shortcuts that help us make faster decisions. But when it comes to hiring, or tech hiring for that matter, quick snap judgments aren't really helpful because our brains are using unconscious shortcuts or unconscious bias that really have nothing to do with the task at hand in terms of deciding which candidate is best for the job. So in my experience, while there have been a lot of ways that unconscious bias have found itself in making decisions, there have been few very commonly seen, both with myself, like we're also human, no exception, where we've been charged guilty of making those decisions based on few biases, and other people in the hiring manager, category. Like I think in the long list of biases, according to me, the one that literally hits as the most common offender in the list of unconscious bias is intuition. Otherwise, which is known as trusting your gut. Like we're all being trained to believe that our instinct knows the best, right? And the truth is that though our instincts just cannot be objective, right? While it might know the best, it's very subjective. And giving ourselves permission to make decisions intuitively instead of considering all the facts during the hiring process opens the door for very subjective and ultimately very suboptimal choices, right? Because our gut is still not a crystal ball, and it's likely to be influenced by a whole lot of irrelevant factors like how charming is the person, how well educated, like Michael added about the pedigree, how attractive or similar to you the candidate seems. So intuition, I feel, is one form in which the unconscious bias manifests its ways. While there are a long list of Michael spoke about the gender biasness, which is very common, and I think it's the most widely spoken about as well, because there's data that shows that the composition in any organization in terms of how many males is to females, data shows that there's a gender biasness which comes into our mind while we recruit candidates. There's different form of biasness. Otherwise, one to commonly speak about that I've witnessed is also confirmation bias, which exactly means that, our tendency as a recruiter or the hiring manager to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms our own misconceptions. For example, while looking at the resume or while looking at the social media presence of the employee or also of the candidate, or also in the beginning of the interaction with the candidate, we tend to assume certain facts about her or him and then base the entire interview further to only confirm on the preconceived notion we've had, right? Which ends up making us take a decision which is definitely not the right one. So confirmation bias does look, very small in terms of its implication, but it is definitely, in fact, like 60% of the interviews we've seen, interviewers have make a decision about a candidate's suitability within 15 minutes of the meeting of them, right? So the biasness of confirming of what we believed about them plays a role here. I think there are different forms of biases that I've also seen, like affinity bias, wherein I feel that someone who has something common to me, like a similar trait or a similar association with, maybe we went to the same alma mater, maybe we have some good friends in common, or we belong to a same fraternity, we tend to believe that this person might be best suited for the role, which, by the way, might not have anything to do with the skills required to do that role, right? So that's another form of biasness that takes place. And likewise, expectation anchor, wherein we set certain standards around which we tend to evaluate the candidate, and then being biased, and regardless of any other skill set that the person may have, we just ignore them because we've anchored them against certain expectations we have. And I think the most common one is halo and horn effect, wherein either we like something really good about a person or really something opposite, polar opposite, something very negative about the candidate, and then we end up ignoring everything else. So our decision that we take towards the end is only influenced by the dominant trait, either positive or negative, that we've seen in the individual, right? So while there are a long list of ways in which unconscious bias manifests itself, I think these are the few common ones that surprisingly we don't even get to realize, because these are at the unconscious level, but are most common one when we end up making judgments about a candidate to choose from.
Yeah. And I think sort of combining what you and Michael said is a lot of these biases that they're within us from a very early age. So it's very hard, like not only is it difficult to recognize it, but it's even more difficult to sort of just stop behaving that way, because that's the way you've behaved your entire life. Like Michael alluded to with the Lego example, it's very interesting. And I really appreciate you sharing some of those different kinds of bias, because I am going to launch our second poll now just to hear from our audience. And we have a list of different kinds of biases. This isn't all of them, obviously. There's plenty, and I'm sure there's even some that don't even exist yet. But I am going to launch our second poll here, which is going to appear on your screen. It's a multi-choice, so you can answer more than once. The question is this: what types of unconscious bias is the most challenging to spot in the tech recruitment process? Some of these were already alluded to from Sanya and Michael, but confirmation bias, expectation anchor, similarity attraction, the halo effect, horn effect, age bias, and gender bias. I think that's it, or is there intuition as well, which is another one that Sanya alluded to. It'll just be interesting to see your results, guys, and we'll share that once everyone's placed their vote. I can see there should still be some more coming through. There are. But I can tell you now there's an overwhelming winner. Give it a couple more seconds. Okay. No more votes. Oh, one more. All right. I'm going to end the poll and share the results, which should appear on your screen. So we had 63% for similarity affection. Expectation anchor was second with 32. Confirmation and halo had 26 apiece. Age and gender also had 11, and the horn effect had 5. But yeah, it is interesting to see, and obviously these aren't the only kinds of biases that exist, but it certainly it's good to know, that to sort of to see some of these from your insights, guys. So really appreciate that. And I'll move along. I might start with you, Barry, with this. We've sort of touched on this point already about becoming self-aware. Like it's sort of impossible to become aware of something that's unconscious. Like we said, it's more about education and knowledge. But do you think it is possible, maybe through technology or through something else, to become self-aware enough to at least mitigate your bias, not to eliminate, but to sort of manage your bias, to sort of, so you can make, let's say, more objective hiring decisions?
Yeah. I think firstly, let me just reflect on the results of the poll, which doesn't surprise me. So many times we all hire in our own image, don't we? You'll see, do I want to go for a beer with that person I might hire? Would I go for a coffee with them? Would I invite them around to my house? And sort of, which has got nothing to do with how good they are going to be as an employee or a resource, but we nearly always hire in our own image, even if we don't think we are doing that. It's really, really interesting. So I'm not surprised by the similarity result. I think, I don't think we can completely become sort of self-aware enough to mitigate our own bias, but I think we can do quite a lot to influence it. And I think, as you said, Justin, it's mainly about awareness and education, right? If this is helpful. We're talking about this now. We'll go and talk to our colleagues about it. It's quite I suppose the profile of unconscious bias is increasing in industry, but I think we can do more to educate those hiring managers and recruiters to what unconscious bias is and what to look out for. And I actually think that education process should start not just at the recruitment process. It should start with the type of talent that you're looking for. If you always use the same model of an FTE and you use an agency to recruit it, you're nearly always going to get the same type of candidates. If you take a step back and say, I have a job of work to do, what's the best way of getting that activity completed? You might look in a completely different place, right? You might look at a talent platform using a freelance model. You might look at crowdsourcing. You might look at open innovation. You might look at fractional workers. You might retain somebody and put them on a 0 hours contract so they could work more flexibly. There are things you can do which are completely different to just looking at the recruitment process. So I do think it starts at a greater awareness of all the different sources of talent that there are out there. But then if you do decide that you need to recruit somebody, then I think then also you need to think about every step in the recruitment process, from how you write the description to who you get to source the candidates and how you train and educate them, the format of the responses that come back in, whether you have names and photographs and descriptions and backgrounds and ages and sexes, and you need to make decisions about that as a team. And I think it's you need to spend time thinking about this as a topic. So I don't think it's possible to remove it completely. I just think it's possible to do a better job by becoming more aware and having better training and education.
Building a process, like you said, that sort of is designed to at least mitigate it, as we said. Yeah. Amy, maybe if you've got something to add here on this point.
Sure. I think it's important for leaders to be public about sharing where they know they have their own bias as well, because it's kind of this this assumption that if you're excluding people, that you're a bad person or that you're deliberately being racist or prejudiced. And again, it's unconscious. And so I think leaders being very public about where they know they have their own shortcomings is really important. For me, I actually went through just to do my own little kind of data deep dive on myself. I wanted to see what my network looked like. Typically people hire through their networks, especially when you're building early stage company. So I just kind of skimmed through my LinkedIn and I wanted to see, my assumption was that I was going to have a lot more women than men. And I just kind of wanted to take a look. And what I realized was that it was pretty much 50-50 male, female, but it was like 90% white people. And so that was like a glaringly obvious thing that when I started looking through, I was like, that's something I hadn't taken into account. And that's clearly like when I'm recommending people for jobs or thinking about who I may, want to bring into the organization. If I'm relying on my network, I'm going to be bringing in the same person over and over again. So one, calling that out with my team so that they can help check me on that, but then also diversifying where I'm meeting people, diversifying where I'm recruiting talent from, diversifying all of that is really important, I think. And so doing your own personal inventory, I think is a good start for leaders so that they can explain to the team where they know they have their own bias. Make this not a taboo thing to talk about. And then people can help each other to be like, hey, I know this is your blind spot. Cool. Like this is what I'm seeing happen here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. I'm not sure, maybe Sanya or Michael. Sanya, do you have something you'd like to add here?
No, I think I really, what Barry and Amy added a quite interesting point. I firmly believe, the funny part about unconscious biases, they're at the unconscious level. So you'll never know that they're doing that, right? First step has to be self-aware. And I love what Amy said, that it happens with all of us. We're all humans, right? Regardless, like we've been doing this for the ages now, doesn't mean that we're still not biased, right? So first step for each one of us is to be unapologetically accept and be aware that what kind of biases are we bringing in place when making decisions. And the second step is to train ourselves and take corrective measures, right? Like a corrective action, what we did at Lena also, when we figured that for the tech recruitment, we were majorly looking at a specific gender or people from a specific pedigree / list of companies to come from. We realized that we are unconsciously making a bias toward a set of people. And then we trained our hiring managers to think differently, that maybe we want to eliminate these filters to give a fair chance to everyone, and then look at people the way they are and see what they bring onto the table, regardless of just looking at the certain part on their CVs, right? So I think accepting that you are making unconscious biases in your decisions, as small and as big it could be, and then training, starting from the first step, like, Barry added, is the way we can try in a direction to combat it. Definitely eliminating it will take a lot of more things that we can talk later about. But at our own level and at our team level, this is what we can get started with. And I think sessions like this just bring more awareness so that even if you're not aware that, hey, unknowingly you're doing this, you get to a reality check and then you plan your corrective actions.
Yeah, for sure.
And Justin, I do think that there's three, they kind of been touched on and each of the panelists have hit on them, but I look at it like there's three, there's people, process, and technology. And it's not just one of those things that has to be addressed. And I'm going to start backwards, just my own experience, right? I think technology, certainly in what we do at Torque, technology is a huge part of our recruiting process, to use AI, use data, use things that can remove the resume elements from a hiring process. And that's great. That's all well and good. That will certainly help to solve the problem, but not in and of itself, right? So technology is a huge problem. The process is the second problem. And when I think about process, it's really about holistically looking at it, where it's you may have the best tech in the world that removes bias, but maybe you're attracting people to the program, and that attraction, as Barry said before, crowdsourcing models are intrinsically they are unbiased, right? They are, except for what about if you're attracting the pool in that sees the crowdsourcing opportunity that has bias within it, and that's what we see. So as we're building a community, if we're using technology to remove bias from our vetting processes in Torque, But the attraction is bringing, together 90% male audience, and we're not solving the problem, right? So you have to look at that process and make sure that, hey, the messaging that we're trying to attract people to the Torque community and why you should be interested in Torque and what are the things that you can participate in and why it's valuable to you. Those have to be addressing the fact that we're looking for a diverse set of candidates at the get-go, at the beginning of the funnel. And then finally, this is my own experience. I think there is the people part of it. There's a huge need for coaching. I think often we'll say training, and training to me is sort of a check the box thing. I think coaching is the right solution here, where you're actively getting mentored in recognizing that, hey, maybe there was bias in this. Maybe you didn't see this. Maybe this is something you should be thinking of. I try to find opportunities for coaching any chance I get. And the reason why I do that is because whenever I do, it's something that I didn't see. It's something that comes up that's like, that was really valuable. I didn't see it. Now I see it. But 2 weeks later, there's something else. So I think there's an ongoing coaching that I think organizations should think about for problems like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think absolutely. It's ongoing, like you said, but I think the biggest takeaway from all of your responses there was that it starts at the very beginning, it's not like something that you can just halfway through the process be like, oh, we want to change this candidate pool, or we're looking for a different kind of candidate, or however it is. It's at the very beginning, from the job description, from where you're sourcing the talent from. So now it is interesting that you all sort of touched on that point, but from different angles. So I appreciate it very much, all of you. I will move along now, and I will get the phone now. I'm just checking. And I was hoping, Amy, maybe if I'd ask this one to you. And we've talked about the point of sort of recognizing unconscious bias, or not recognizing it, or being aware of it, or however it is. But when it comes to a hiring decision, is it possible to sort of differentiate between whether that decision to hire or not to hire was actually based on bias, or based on maybe just this person wasn't qualified for the job? Like how can you differentiate between the two as a hiring manager?
I mean, that is obviously a very hard thing to do, because at the end of the day, you think that you're hiring the best people for all the right reasons. I think it comes down to, one, did you have a diverse candidate pool to begin with? If it's the same candidate pool over and over again, there was bias that was already feeding into whether or not you were going to hire somebody. I also think that the people that are part of that interviewing process, it's really important that that group is as diverse as possible and pulling in, because they're going to bring their own perspectives. They're going to bring their own biases as well. But if you get enough different types of people that are doing that interview, there's a check and a balance there to make sure that you don't get the same one note over and over again. At the end of the day, I don't know if there's no rubber stamp that says, yep, this hire is clean, no unconscious bias here. That doesn't exist, of course. But just trying to mitigate that throughout the process, and by encouraging the team to think about the approach that they're taking in that interview process, the questions they're asking, the types of qualifications that we're looking at, trying to mitigate it through that entire process, and make sure that that diverse team is part of the hiring decision as well, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Again, coming back to this point of, it starts at the very beginning again.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Thank you, Barry. Maybe you'd like to extend on that.
But I think that it's so important to have multiple people involved in the interview process. If it is a recruitment process and you're going to employ somebody, on a part-time, fractional or full-time basis, just basing on one person interviewing inevitably is going to lead to some form of bias. So having a mixed demographic, maybe at different levels of seniority within the organization, certainly different backgrounds to interview, so you get a balanced scorecard approach. Almost like taking, like if you go through a procurement process and there's an RFP and you have to do a scorecard, and you then look at the results based on the numbers that the team that were assessing the supplier provided. You then end up with a number, and we don't really do that typically in a recruitment process, right? We sort of somebody makes a decision, and I think if we took more of that balanced scorecard approach. We added up the numbers that we'd scored the person on, was a number of factors, and we ended up with a score, and we based our decision on that. We'd end up with a much less biased outcome. So I think that, diversity of the recruitment, the people involved in the recruitment process, and having more of a data-based assessment, I think would really help.
Yeah. We interestingly, we talked about this in our last series, actually. We had this 3-part series about HR and IT cooperation, essentially. And one of the things we talked about there was the importance of having both HR and IT present, particularly in a technical interview, which is something typically HR wouldn't sit in on. But having that perspective from sort of different sides, looking for different qualities as well, I think that also sort of encourages more open-minded decisions about a particular candidate without just having one train of thought, one particular kind of decision maker. It's obviously going to sort of tunnel the, or corner being made internally. So it's interesting. Thanks very much, guys. We do have a few questions left and one more poll, but I would like to remind everybody that there's time for a Q&A session. If anyone would like to would like me to ask an open question to our panelists, you can fire them in there. They're anonymous, so you don't have to put your name. If you're too embarrassed or something to ask a question, don't feel too shy. But if not, we still have a few more questions planned. So I will move into this next one, and I'll start with you, Michael, if that's okay. We've touched on the point about sort of recognizing our own biases, or managing our own biases, but I wonder if you've ever been involved in a situation where you can see bias in another person that you work with, and they say, for example, were continually making the same kind of hiring decision over and over again based on their own bias that they weren't aware of. And I wondered if you've dealt with that kind of situation, and if so, how did you deal with it? What strategies can you suggest to deal with such a situation?
Yeah, so I have dealt with it. I've dealt with it, I'll start with, I've dealt with it myself. Okay. And I think that, Barry hit on something that I'd like to play on, this whole concept of data. So if you work with me or you live with me, you understand that kind of everything that I think about is hey, if you can't explain it in numbers, then you probably don't know what you're talking about. And I think that is true, though. I really do. When you come to problems like this, data is what kind of tells you, what the real story is. So in my experience, so a lot of it, often you're in situations in running a business where it's these next 10 hires are super important. And if we don't get them done, the business is going to suffer. And all of a sudden that sense of urgency can come out, and then it's okay, great. We want to make sure we have a diverse hiring process, but it's more important for us to get these roles filled. That's a red flag. You can't have, there's certain things that you just can't bypass in the process. But back to the data piece, where I think you uncover those issues is when you look at the data. You need to be really looking at the data from, fine, that we hired, this is the person that ended up get hired, and this is their profile, and this is where they fit in with the team. And then, but you got to look at okay, who else was interviewed? Who made it to the final interview? Well, who made it to the screening round? Well, who was the initially interested in this role, right? And you look back, that data tells a story. And it always does. That one things that I always say, data in and of itself is, not that useful, but understanding trends in data is what is useful. So once you understand those trends, another thing that you'll hear me say all the time, if you work with me or you live with me, is trends don't lie, right? Trends are trends. And what we as humans have a propensity to do is to live by this false positive mentality, right? It's hey, you know what? Making sure that we're hiring a diverse workforce is important to me. Don't think the problem's solved after one diverse hire. That is often a false positive that people fall into and don't solve the real underlying issues. And so it comes back to me to data, and that's what I did in my own. So as I was in a situation, again, I'm going to pick on myself, of building a team, building an executive team, building a leadership team, and having to really keep myself focused on the data of hey, who am I looking at to fill these roles? Like, where am I sourcing from to fill these roles? And, with the help of my co-founder, Dave, who's often the data guy, is like really kind of looking at it from a data perspective and then understanding, okay, these are the decisions that we have to make and these are the changes that we have to do. So it all starts with the data and then understanding the trends that you see. So I certainly have seen it in my career with people that work for me. And like I said, starting with myself.
And it's a matter of accepting the data as well. I think some people don't like the truth so much as well. It doesn't lie. So, I really appreciate it. Thanks, Michael. And Sanya, I want to look at it from the sort of reverse side this time, when we've talked about a hiring manager, someone responsible for making the hiring decision and not sort of being, aware of their bias and how it affected the decision. But what about from a candidate perspective? Have you ever encountered a candidate that's come to you and said, "Oh, look, I think this hiring managers made this decision based on bias. I'm more than qualified for the role. Why was I not hired?"
Oh, well, I think I have had plenty of, and among those examples, I'm guilty as charged for one of them as well, because we're all also making unconscious biasness. While there are different kind of biases, right? One of them is conformity bias, wherein while an individual has, Michael said, taken data-driven decisions and liked candidate A for a role, there was a situation wherein he, in the excitement of liking that person, almost just indirectly told the candidate that you're hired in the interview, right? While at the end, the other group of the people, which was the directors of the company and the other hiring managers, like a candidate B. So in order to conform to the likings of a bigger group, we had to ultimately choose a candidate B. And the candidate A, because already was spoken to that he's hired, came up to be saying that he thinks that there's a biasness on the part of the decision maker, that, I was almost told, but I've not been offered this job, right? And there have been other examples where someone, because explicitly told that, they've been a college dropout, that on effect played a role. And then everything else skill set that the person had was down the drain. And, the decision maker just left the candidate overall, which candidate could already, realize, because it was very clearly evident that for one black mark on his profile, every other skill that he's had or the growth that he's experienced was just taken, aback. So there have been a couple of cases like that. But I think the most important one that I've dealt with in terms of talking to the candidate and the hiring manager in order to, again, like Michael said, look at what data we have to make this decision a successful one, right? This is just one part of the interview. There have been consistent other hiring processes in the different when people have taken the interviews, and how have been their feedback for that particular candidate, and then do we have a scope to reverse the decision and make the right choice there, right? So definitely there have been a couple of cases where we've seen where candidates are also able to say that there have been biasness brought in place while making the decision, and that's put us into a difficult split to say that what to do next about this. But I think, like Michael said, it's all about, even to take a corrective action, how do you go back and see the trends, as trends don't lie, and data and the recorded feedback, right? So look at that and then decide how do you want to deal with that situation.
Yeah. It's interesting that data keeps sort of coming back into it. It just shows the development of the industry as a whole. You wouldn't have thought years ago that data would be playing such an important role in HR. But it's obviously like you both said, it doesn't lie, and it can actually help sort of maybe mitigate this problem a little bit for sure. So appreciate it, guys. I will launch our final poll, which is actually going to shape up our second to last question. So let me get it prepared. That's not the right one. This one. Okay, so it's going to appear on your screen now. This should be a single choice answer. It is. And the question is this: what is your opinion on eliminating unconscious bias from the tech hiring process? And you have three options. We've kind of discussed it already today. You cannot fully eliminate unconscious bias. It's possible to mitigate unconscious bias. It's possible to fully eliminate unconscious bias. And I think we've even sort of unknowingly affected the poll as it goes. Or perhaps we could have launched it earlier on. But it'd still be interesting to see if anyone, believes to see their insights on this one. But I can tell you already, I'll stop sharing it with us, because you'll see that there is a resounding winner, 94%. And I think it's pretty telling, obviously, what we discussed so far today, that by nature, it's impossible to be aware of something that's unconscious to us. But I think this is what we're trying to sort of educate everyone here and ourselves is about being able to mitigate and manage unconscious bias. So I wanted, Barry, maybe if you could sort of touch on this and elaborate on the poll. What's your opinion on it in general about sort of mitigating, managing, eliminating unconscious bias? How do you see it moving forward?
I think, and we sort of touched on it already, right? I think as the poll suggests, we can mitigate it, but we'll never eliminate it. Let's just accept that. And then, mitigating it is super important, and that, it starts, as I said, with taking a step back and thinking about your process end to end, where you find your talent from, and then the process that you go through to select the right talent. And I think, as we see headlines about this all the time, right? We are in such a scarcity of talent sort of time at the moment, with we simply cannot find enough tech roles to deliver the services that businesses require. So getting the right tech talent is super important. It's almost like the talent that you have internally or externally becomes your currency. It becomes it is, and of course, an asset that's incredibly important. So I think this applies to whether you're recruiting full-time employees or whether you're accessing external resources. Having the right talent to deliver the right services is super important, and making sure that you have a diverse workforce to deliver those services from a multitude of different backgrounds and locations is proven to be of significant benefit. So diversity is super important. So I think it's just going back to that. Think about the process. Think about where you're getting talent from. Don't just look in the same places for the same type of resources. You will always get the same results. If you really want to focus on trying to mitigate unconscious bias, then start thinking about different talent models, using different methods, comparing what you would have done traditionally against a different type of talent access model, and seeing what the results were, and collecting data on it, and then making decisions. But just, and as I said earlier, educating anyone involved in the talent acquisition process to make sure that they are aware of how easy it is to make biased decisions and the things to look out for. So, it's not possible to remove it completely. Definitely possible to mitigate it, and it comes by having a very open mindset to where you get your talent from, the type of talent that you use, and the process that you use to select ultimately the talent that work for you internally and externally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we all agree that it's not possible to fully eliminate it. I don't think there's much point to sort of continue on that. We're well aware of it, but you did touch on process, and I thought maybe Amy, you could elaborate on that, about sort of building a process that at least minimizes the effects of unconscious bias. So what are some tips you could share here about the process as a whole?
Sure. I think a big piece of it is including as diverse a group in the hiring process as possible, so that you can do a check and balance on those different types of bias that are going to come into play. I think it's also important to look at, there's lots of software that's out there that is meant to help you remove bias from your hiring process. I think that there are places that could be interesting. I think that there's also, it's a little bit of a cautionary tale too, because what bias went into building the software that's helping you remove bias? Like, there's a team that's behind that software that was built. So I think as HR teams get pitched that software a lot. So thinking about being very thoughtful and mindful of where you incorporate it or you don't, I think is important. And then diversifying your hiring sources. You hire from the same source over and over again, you're going to get the same result. And so, my example is, again, like, I've been part of building 6 teams in Boston prior to starting my own company. Every single one of those prior 6 companies had MIT, computer science degree as a requirement. Every single one of those engineers was taught by the same professors. Every single one of them. That means they all make the exact same mistakes. That's a problem. So you get the same fail points over and over again in your company. And when you can see that happen over and over again, it doesn't mean that MIT engineers are amazing, but diversify, add other types as well, add other types of folks, other types of backgrounds is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Sanya, what about you? What tips can you share on this one about building a process to eliminate unconscious bias?
Well, I think Mary and Amy have covered a couple of them. Definitely what Michael said in the past, right? Other than self-awareness and coaching at the people level, at the process level, definitely we can define and structure our interview process, which is more objective in nature. So that while an individual who's taking care of the interview as an interviewer do not make the conversation become quite objective, and knows that regardless of which background the candidate is coming from, there's a certain set of questions and a certain format that needs to be followed so that everyone is given a fair chance to be assessed against the role requirements, right? Secondly, at the technological level, Amy rightly said, it's a full-blown business now in the market where companies are coming up with solutions which can objectively give you data-driven analytics about a person's personality or their potential precisely to be able to do the job in future, regardless what's been their background, right? So at the technology level, at the process level, at the people level, we can bring in these changes. One interesting thing that at Lena, what we try to do is define a philosophy of diversity, right? So like in the tech hiring, while we go deep down, not at the 40,000 level feet, but deeper in the team, and we realize that, okay, we have people only from X kind of colleges, or university grads, or with X number of years of experience. And we realize that we're not giving chance to freshers. So that means there's a missing link in the diversity pool of one particular team. So making conscious effort to hire people only for that pool that is missing in your entire team structure, right? So even if you say that you want to bring diversity into your system, you need to consciously know that what is the structure of the team currently. Like Amy said that, all MITs. So what could we do now to bring in that is missing in your team? Maybe using the current times of COVID, right? At least gender biasness, geographies and age and free time, full-time biasness, these can absolutely be eliminated in the COVID time that we're in. We're all remote. So I don't think we can anymore say that we can't hire women for a specific role because she's to take care of household or children. Everyone has home. Everyone's take care of that, right? So regardless of the gender piece coming in, now we can try to eliminate that thing. We can hire anyone across any geography, age group for that matter, and tend to use this new style of working as more advanced way of giving chance to more people to come and become part of the team. And I think if you consciously look at the fact that, like what I personally started doing recently, and I think it's paid a good result to me, is that at a certain level of interview, if we push the review of the resume to the later step, right? Like when I go and talk to someone, I want to talk to them as it is, without reading the feedback of what other hiring managers have given, without looking at the CV and making some preconceived notion about the person, just talking to him or her the way they are, and then going back and revalidating with the other hiring managers' feedback or the CV that what does it make sense or not, right? So that you're talking to the person as it is and giving them the fair chance to be, for your interview, because you want to assess someone as they could do the job regardless of whichever background they come in, right? So innovative ways of finding how you can change the process at every step and how you can restructure the team that you have currently could also add up in a way of bringing more diversification to your team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Michael, I wondered if you wanted to sort of tie a bow on this one with your final tips that haven't already been sort of shared from the others. I'm not sure there's any remaining.
Sure, Justin. Yeah, I'll keep it quick. So, I'm a giant proponent of virtual work. I have been most of my career. In fact, we shut down our offices in. So 2013, I said, hey, people should be able to work remotely. Like it was a long time before we were kind of forced to this global work from home experiment that COVID put us into. But I think that starts with a culture of being able to work in a virtual environment, which I oftentimes have coined as like an online first style of management, leadership, of culture, of where you look at your company and you say, hey, we're going to first build for an online first type of environment where you should be able to do your job in an online mode. You should be able to do your job in a virtual mode. And I think that, just kind of one of the things that we really have at our advantage right now is we've all had to do it. right? Like most of us, at least, as you know, I think most of us on this call and a lot of people listening probably have been in a work from home virtual environment. It opens us up to so many more different possibilities of, as Amy said, you're not just recruiting from the same pool of MIT students in Boston, or your diversity being that you go down the river a little bit and recruit from another school, right? Like you can recruit from anywhere. So like one of the things I would encourage people to think about in their processes and how they manage their company is like, we don't live in a 9-to-5 culture. We don't even live into a Monday to Friday work week. Mm-hmm. So figure out how to set up your culture that you can use the best talent, the most diverse talent from a global perspective. And that helps to kind of set us down a direction where we will start seeing the problem, I don't want to say solve itself, but there's a lot more opportunity to solve the problem if you think of a global virtual workforce. And it's not that hard, right? I work with people in different time zones all day, every day of the week. And it's something you just have to work at. So I would say that's one thing that we didn't really talk about a ton, but virtual and an online first mentality is something that can help.
The globalized sort of workforce now, for sure.
If I can just add on that, Mike, I think that makes such an important point, and that global remote model, it enables us to sort of rebalance some of opportunity. If you think about it, it's a bit of a cliche, but talent is universal. It exists everywhere in the world, from rural India to the UK to wherever, anywhere in the world, you have brilliant people. But opportunity is always been restricted to specific geographies, right? To Silicon Valley, to the city of London, to Boston, to New York, to wherever. And so many people in society have therefore been, disadvantaged or disenfranchised. And working remotely and using digital talent models enables us to level the playing field and give access to opportunities to everyone, from remote India to people on the autistic spectrum to whatever, because they don't have to travel to an office to find that opportunity. And I think that's a brilliant thing for diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sorry, Sonia, did you want to add something? Or?
No, I was just, I agree to what both of them say. And I think little what Amy was also saying, especially startups, they have this mentality to have like-minded people in their team from a particular geography or fraternity or experience, right? While definitely want people who are like-minded, you don't want to build a team of robots who think and behave like you, right? So especially now, you want to bring in people who complement your skill sets and definitely think differently or have different styles of working, or their approach are different. You want to ensure that they share the common vision so that you can be successful together, but they have a diversified way of working, right? And I think once we change that shift in our mindset, we are much more open to hire someone or make a choice of a candidate who's absolutely different from me, but complement me in my team, right? So definitely diversity flows organically that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, guys, we better jump into the Q&A. We're right at our time, but I do see 2 questions in here that I'd like to ask you guys. Anyone can answer them. I'll start with Sebastian. I think this was mentioned early on in the discussion, but the question is this: how are you solving the coding and tech skills bias on the skills testing process? I can't remember, it might have been Michael or Barry. One of you mentioned something about the bias in code, but I wondered maybe if any of you guys have any tips on this one. I can say for one that DevSkiller, we have a feature which is anonymized testing. So we have this feature where we basically, some of our customers use it, some don't. And basically you can anonymize the test results. So you see the results, you see what it says, but you have no idea who it is, which, is one little feature that can be used to certainly, help this problem. I'm not sure if anyone has anything else to add on this.
I think that's a great answer. I think that, what you guys do at DevSkiller and others, enable that, remove the bias, I think, or can do, especially using anonymous methods. And I think that's probably that would have been the answer I'd given. I think that's very good best practice.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we'll move on. So we've got this next one here from Anna, who says hi from Poland as well. I wonder your comments on culture fit and team fit, so popular and impactful in hiring and tech industry, at least here in Poland. Is it a serious threat for unbiased hiring? Do you agree? Anyway, sure. Amy or someone, would you like to jump on this? About the
Sure. I think, well, there's the concept of team fit, culture fit, that in my opinion, gets a lot of echo chamber. You end up creating, you hire people who are like you because they fit. What we look at Compt is looking at culture add and trying to find folks that are adding something new or different to the culture, which can then, add something extra. So if you start looking at like the team fit concept, to me just ends up with a lot of the same type of person. We communicate in the same way, we think in the same way, we're bringing the same perspective. I think looking at it from a culture add perspective can help kind of unwind that a little bit. I think that is really important. If you end up with an echo chamber, I mean, it's the same thing. You're going to end up with the same group of people that you're hiring.
Awesome. I appreciate the answer. If we do have time for one last quick one, I'll have to make this on the last one, guys, from Louise. When screening hundreds to thousands of CVs, which criteria should we use instead of the traditional ones, pedigree, education, to access the right talents and mitigate unconscious bias? Is there anything we can do? But from your guys' advice here.
I think I'll jump in. There's three things that we use. So it's historical skills, which is a lot, especially in the tech area. You can see, usually like what have you been doing the last 12 months, right? Most of that is actually, you can source it from GitHub or other sources like that. So you can see historical, right? Unconscious bias. What have you been working on the last 12 months, right? Vetted skills, right? Like you said, Justin, about how DevSkiller does it. That's the second one. Like, hey, these are verified skills. You are good at this. We know it for sure, right? That's a positive thing. And then the final one is interest, right? You got to be interested and motivated in what you want to do. Like those three things to me are what we use at Torque.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, guys, we are a little bit over time, but I do appreciate everyone for joining us today, and particularly to our panelists for taking the time out of your day from joining all over the world. We have quite a diverse international panel, I'd say, from where we're joining from. So thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you, Barry, Michael, Sanya, and Amy. And thank you to all of you for joining in. Don't forget that we will be sending you this survey straight after this concludes. So if you take the time out of your day to fill that in, we'd really appreciate it. And other than that, we'll see you next time, guys. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Justin. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.